Good luck.
Okay, we'll now commence tonight's meeting. Thank you for all those members of the public attending in the gallery. You may stay until the end of this meeting or leave after your item has been heard. So item 1, membership. Membership is as listed in the agenda. Councillor Lena Messina is on a leave of absence at the moment. Item 2 is the apologies. So we have Councillor Lena Messina and all other councillors are present. Item 3, disclosures of conflicts of interest. Is there any disclosures? I have a disclosure in relation to item 5.8, which is the 658 to 664 High Street, Thornbury. Okay, moving on to item 4, confirmation of minutes of the Planning Committee. Is there a mover?
Happy to move that.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried. Okay. Moving on to item 5, consideration of reports. So 5.1, application for a planning permit at 708 to 710 High Street, Reservoir.
Just in relation to that first item, from advice from our officers, I'd like to move that that item be considered after item 5.3, I believe, and that's on advice of our officers to allow the applicant and objector to be able to speak. So if I can move that item 5.1 be heard after item 5.3.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. And do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried. Moving on to 5.2.
Councillors, this is an application for a medium density development at 50 Regent Street, Preston. I'd like first off start by saying this is Council can only form a view on this application as an application for review has been lodged with VCAT due to our failure to make a decision within the prescribed time. So not a decision, but a forming a view. Councillors, this is an application for a medium density development on the corner of Middle Grove and Regent Street. 4 double-storey dwellings are proposed. 1 dwelling will front Regent Street, whilst the other dwellings will have frontage to Myrtle Grove. Councillors, this application has been advertised in the normal fashion, signs placed on the site, and notices sent to the dwelling owners and occupiers. As a result of that notification, 17 objections have been received from the local community. Councillors, the grounds of objection from the community are summarised in the agenda at page 27 and 28. Councillors, our view is that this application is should not be supported for a number of reasons. A few of the key factors relate to how the development negatively impacts on the immediate neighbour to the east. It's a single detached house with a conventional backyard space. The development proposed is a continuous 2-storey form, presents with minimal ground level setbacks alongside the neighbour's rear yard. And further to that, that's continued through to the first floor. So our view is that the development presents with unacceptable visual bulk. and massing to that immediate neighbour. There's also minimal opportunity to soften the built form as a result of the minimum setbacks proposed. Councillors, a detailed list of our grounds are listed in the agenda, and we're recommending that the application should not be supported based on those grounds. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite the applicant, Mr. Chris McKenzie, to speak. Thank you. You've got 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. I probably won't take up the whole 5 minutes. There's a recommendation for you to refuse following our lodging to VCAT for failure. One of the things you probably aren't aware of, because it doesn't flow through the officer reports, is that we've had reasonably extensive discussions with the officers who've prepared the report on the advertised plans, which is what's before you for refusal. We're well advanced on preparing amended plans that we intend to substitute through the VCAT process. At this point, it's probably going to happen just after the Christmas break. The intent will be to formulate changes to the plans that do look to respond to the concerns that the officers raised. So hopefully then, if we work with the officers and do that process, we may have the opportunity to come back early in the new year with amended plans, where I might use my time to actually talk in more detail about the design, hopefully with an officer recommendation to support. So thank you.
Thank you.
Today was really a courtesy to your process to not ignore the fact that you're involved. So thank you.
Thank you. You can resume your seat in the gallery. There is no objector registered to speak, so I'll open it to...
I'd move the motion as officer recommendation.
Happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Williams. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, obviously we can only make a decision on what's before us here. It is heartening to hear that there'll be substitute plans, and obviously then we'll spend some time if we get to consider and form a view on those.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
There's a number of issues here regarding setbacks, landscaping and car access visual bulk, so I look forward to seeing the new plans, the amended plans, and that's all. Yeah.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Okay. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. So the Planning Committee has decided to refuse the planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. Notices detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. Okay. Moving on to item 5.3, application for planning permit at 1/72 to 74 Chifley Drive, Preston. Over to the officers.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. This application seeks approval to use an existing warehouse building as an indoor recreation facility and place of worship. The premises will be used as a community facility for the Somali Darul Salam community, providing support and a meeting place. The application sets out the community facility functions are a primary function of the building, with the place of worship use to be secondary to that primary use. Overall, the premises will be limited to 200 patrons, and there are 61 car spaces provided to support the proposed use. The application has been advertised and is the subject of 38 objections. These are summarised and responded to on pages 52 to 54 of the agenda. As set out in page 54 and 55, the key issues are really concerning what Council's strategy is for this area. It is an industrial area. This is a non-industrial use going into that area. The report does explain there is a precedent for this type of activity where a large space is required, and that's considered an appropriate land use for an industrial zone 3 parcel. With that, the application is recommended support, subject to conditions that are outlined in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite the applicant, Mr. Martin Thompson, to speak. Thank you. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, councillors. I'm behalf of the community, I'd like to read from Ed's statement. Obviously, we've only got a few minutes to speak. I'm sure you've read the officer's report and we're quite happy with it. There's one small thing we'd like to talk about, but I thought I'd talk about some of the issues that you're probably going to hear about after I've spoken. I'm sure you've looked at the plans, but the parking for the building, proposed parking complies with the planning scheme. It's all surrounding or behind the building, so it's not a case of people parking through the estate to then walk down to this building to park. It makes no sense. It's easier for people to drive through the estate, down to the back building and park in what is almost exclusive parking for this building, although it's not. It's common parking for everyone to use. So we have a bit of a reverse situation when it comes to parking, in that people are unlikely to park through the estate, which is obviously going to be a concern of other tenants in the estate, and have them meander down to this building. We've got a situation where there's plenty of parking behind the building and in front of the building. The hours of operation appear extensive, but that's a reflection of the site's multifunction role, as we heard from Mr. Rudd. It's a Royal Community Centre, so there are different activities being conducted at different times with partners there. But typically you'll see maybe 10 to 15 people on site for most of the time. Prayer on site, the use looks to offer prayer for those who may be on site at the time of prayer. We pray, I'm not Muslim, but we pray 5-6 times a day, but the critical times, firstly there are a number of mosques, as you know, in the municipality that people would typically go to pray, but if numbers are on site, the big events that would have a large number turning up to, we've got a cap number of 200, would be either before business hours or well after business hours when that is run. As I said, basically we're pretty happy with the permit. There is a permit condition that relates to contamination. It's a required condition the council needs to put on the permit because there could be the potential of contamination. The only issue you have with it, it's not really an issue with it, we'd just like to see if we could add another condition. The condition calls for an assessment to be done for contamination, which is not incorrect, but the practice note relating to contamination also offers an alternative way to determine whether there is contamination on site without having to do a very expensive drilling into concrete to try and find what may or may not be under there. So we were suggesting that, and I'll put the word in here, but we were suggesting that perhaps another condition could be added to suggest that an environmental permit should be required unless the proponent can demonstrate the satisfaction of the responsible authority that the site has never been used for a potentially contaminating activity, or that other strategy or programs are in place to effectively manage any contamination. Now that's straight out of the practice direction verbatim, but that could be included in the permit. It gives the applicant two options. They can explore assessing the site in different ways without having to drill holes in the ground. Further than that, then they've got to drill holes in the ground and come up with a proper assessment. So we'd certainly welcome that if we could add that to the permit, but other than that, that's all we have to say, and we certainly welcome the recommendation to approve.
Great, thank you, Mr. Thompson. You can resume your seat in the gallery.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite the objector, Stephen Koenig, to speak. Thank you. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors, for the opportunity of addressing the committee. My name is Stephen Koenig, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of the owners of 8 of the 11 industrial units on the land who lodged a joint objection to the proposal. All car parking spaces on the land are private property, owned and allocated to specific units. Any land not within an industrial unit or a parking space is common property and generally used for access and is under the exclusive control of the owner's corporation. Unit 1 currently has 44 parking spaces, one of which we understand is to be deleted. A minimum of 60 parking spaces must be provided to accommodate the proposed 200 people. Now, the plans before council show 61 spaces for the building, but only 18 of these, that is almost 30%, do not exist and are to be located on common property. The application before you does not include any consent from the owners corporation for these spaces. The use of common property cannot be changed except by a special resolution of the owners corporation. Not less than 75% of lot entitlements must vote in favour of a resolution to change the use of body corp land. Now, the committee has not been informed that my client's objection in May of this year clearly states they represent more than 30% of the lot entitlements and that they will vote against a change of the use of the common property to parking spaces. Now, while the consent of the owners corporation is not a prerequisite to issuing a planning permit, the fact that the owners corporation will not support the conversion of common property to parking is a factor that you as committee members must take into consideration. I'm going to hand here a copy of a Supreme Court case that I'm now going to refer to. And in the Victorian Supreme Court, it's been upheld many times by VCAT. It basically says if the owner of the property refuses to give consent, it would be highly relevant to the authority to know whether there was any realistic prospect of such consent being given. If not, it could be highly relevant to the authority in deciding whether to reject the application as futile. We say to you that the application relies on the conversion of common property to parking spaces. My clients will oppose any resolution to do so. Without the owners corporation consent of conversion, the required parking cannot be provided, and the application in its current form is futile and should be refused. We're saying to you that the proposal does not and will not have access to 61 car spaces. My clients also submit that the combined indoor facility and place of worship is an inappropriate use in the industrial zone. It will promote concentrated levels of non-industrial pedestrian and vehicular traffic on a purely industrial site, and this unit is 110 metres from Chifley Drive. So any people accessing this unit by walking are going to come in conflict with the loading and unloading and general operation of the other industrial units on the site. There is virtually no separation between pedestrian and vehicular traffic on that site, so conflict is inevitable. As we say, on-site parking is grossly inadequate and will lead to congestion both on the site and on Chifley Drive. Local policy actually promotes community facilities within cultural hubs. Chifley Drive is not a cultural hub.
30 seconds.
It's located to the very east of your municipality, so it's really not going to be central to serve your community. The induction of non-industrial uses in core industrial areas will reduce the supply of industrial land and employment opportunities. In summary, my clients do not support the officer's recommendation and urge the committee to refuse to grant an affirmative. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Caney. You can resume your seat in the gallery. Councillors, do you have any questions? Yes, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair. If I can ask through you to our officers for a comment in relation to the matters raised by the objector, particularly in relation to what weight Planning Committee should give to the Owners Corporation matter. So if we can get an officer a comment on the remarks just then.
Yep, before I go to the officer, Mr. Koenig, you can resume your seat in the gallery. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, there is case law, but equally the planning considerations are paramount here. So what sits inside body corporate legislation
although it might be relevant to the practicality of whether a permit can be enacted or not, the planner assessing the application has got to consider based on the information, and the information that they've been received is that the owners have been notified of the application and that the relevant car parking spaces will be provided, and whether they sit on body corporate land, the planning permit will require that they're provided. Mr Koenig's correct that if they cannot be provided, the permit may well be futile. But the officer's assessment is that's not your primary consideration as a planning committee. That sits in another piece of legislation. That's a permission that's required elsewhere. The permission that's required before you now is based on what are relevant considerations in the planning scheme. Because you may well issue a permit and it could be something worked out at a later stage separate to this process.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Through you, Mayor, I would like to ask the questions regarding parking on page 47 under number 4, the recommendation saying starts with a minimum of 61 car parking spaces, and then if you go to page 51, it says under the common property that there's a total of 44 spaces. Can you just break that down or unpack that for me, why there's a difference between before and after?
Yeah, what Mr Koenig explained as well was that there's some of the parking spaces exist on land that's pertinent to the former warehouse that's proposed to be used for the indoor recreation facility, and then there are 18 spaces that sit on the common property. But in total, there's 61 spaces, which exceeds the requirement of 60 required under the planning scheme. And that's what the assessment is for.
Okay. Second question. At what times will most of the activities, not the daytime activities as in the mass and things like that, which obviously where majority of people will come to pray?
Yeah.
Is that during working hours, after hours, weekend?
It varies, and it's set out in the application because there are various important events through the year where prayer times may be earlier, and there are prayer times during the day where, as was said by the applicant, there are generally lower amounts of people during the day, as was put forward in the application, but a maximum of 200. The assessments had to be satisfied that there's sufficient car parking for that peak load during the day, but it has said that there'll be times where you're closer to those peak loads more regularly during those peak event times.
That was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I have two questions. I hope my voice will hold out for both of those questions. One is in relation, I can't locate it right now, but in the report there was a suggestion there about there being a consultation between the applicant and some of the objectors. I just want to ask through you, the Chair, to the officers, what the outcome of that consultation was and whether there was any attendance by objectors to that invitation by the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There was a consultation meeting, and that was at the undertaking of the applicant, and it was put to me that it was to be a neighbourly gesture to see if some of these concerns could be resolved and talked through. It is understood that it did involve objectors and members of the local community to try and reconcile the differences, but as we can see tonight, there wasn't a clear consensus realised.
Okay, and the second question relates into the applicant mentioned the inclusion of an additional clause, and I just want to get a comment through you, the Chair, from our officers in relation to that. If Council was to consider the inclusion of that clause, what the consequences of that would be.
Yeah, as Madam Mayor, as Mr Thompson indicated, there are a few ways under the statement for where there's an environmental audit. The process that he outlined is in fact in the practice note, and there'd be no objection from an officer point of view to that condition being modified and according to what we put forward to the committee.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Well, just following on from that comment, whether it's possible to get a copy of that condition. I did hear it, but before we hear the recommendation, either for or against, I'd like to, if that clause is going to be considered, I'd like to have a look at that. So is it possible for us to have a copy of that to be passed around? Or alternatively, if our officers could provide appropriate wording that would be consistent with the conditions to be heard.
Or a copy of the practice note?
Yeah, sure.
I just have a separate question, if I can, just while our officers are. It's a procedural question, which is just in relation to the earlier matter, which is the consideration of the owners' corporation role in this, and that is that should planning committee support the application and approve the recommendation as listed. If I'm correct in what I heard before, and I'm just seeking clarification, it is then incumbent upon at the owners' corporation level to resolve the provision of car parking to comply with the planning permit. So the applicant needs to comply with the planning permit. That's not a matter from which council at that stage would have any direct involvement, obviously unless the planning permit wasn't being followed. So I'm just seeking clarification in relation to that.
Mr. Rudd?
Yeah, there'd certainly be an issue if the use commenced, and let's, for argument's sake, say that the spaces that are shown on land that the community has access to, which is attached to the former warehouse, if that's provided as car parking and that use proceeds, there'll be a requirement in the planning permit that the full complement of parking be provided, the 61 spaces. Now, if they're not provided, we're in the situation of having an enforcement procedure, and if they can't be practically located, I'd say the applicant would be taking a significant risk commencing the use, knowing that it cannot provide landside parking.
Thank you.
Thank you. We might just wait until we get the copy of the practice note. Yes, Councillor Williams?
Looking at the, through you, Mayor, to the officers, looking at the plans, is it possible to rejig the parking spaces so they go on a different angle, or have a second line, like go in them as a different direction to allow more parking? Because that is a pretty big area at the back. It's a bit difficult to see with the tree. Do we have any weighting in that, or can we make any consideration in something like that?
Madam Mayor, it's not something that was considered as part of the application process, but certainly there could be other options that could be explored. I doubt that that will get the I doubt there's sufficient land there though to get the additional 18 spaces. But yeah, they may well be, if there's those difficulties, council could well receive an amended set of plans to try and provide the full complement part.
Thank you.
There's one thing that can happen, Madam Mayor, that the use could be scaled down to a lower number.
Thank you. So we have the officer recommendation in front of us, but we also have... or do we have an alternate recommendation, motion?
So could you repeat that?
So we have the officer recommendation in front of us, or is there an alternate motion?
I'd like to move the motion set forward by the officers with the amendment to include the clause that's been circulated.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Do you want to read out the amendment and let us know which one it's replacing?
The amendment is as follows. An environmental audit should be required unless the proponent can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the responsible authority that the site has never been used for a potentially contaminating activity, or that other strategies or programs are in place to effectively manage any contamination.
And that's sorry, to replace a particular, in addition, or?
Could we just ask for clarification from the officers as to how to appropriately word the insertion of the practice note? Because I think it needs to amend an existing clause.
That's right. Madam Mayor, I would suggest that the resolution simply request that condition 15 be amended accordingly to allow for that.
Okay.
It's a very long condition, Madam Mayor.
Sorry.
So can I just seek clarification then? It would just be amended accordingly rather than replacing condition 15. So it would be, condition 15 would be amended to include reference to the practice note. Is that?
Yes, is that correct?
Madam Mayor, it would be still suitable if the condition was replaced. The wording of that's sufficiently tight enough that it achieves essentially the same purpose as condition 15.
Okay, so we are replacing condition 15 with the amendment that Councillor Amir read out.
Yes,
Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. Yep. Councillor Amir, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I would like to speak to the motion. I think this is a really good opportunity for the community. This part of Preston, in East Preston, has few places where community groups can gather. I also note that one of the key objectives of this space is for recreation, which is certainly something that Darebin Council supports, is good access to recreation spaces for the community. And I believe that that value provided should be given greater weight than some of the more minor concerns around car parking. Given that, it's quite clearly stated, and it has been consistent throughout discussions, that the peak activity times largely will be outside the times of the peak industry times, and where there may be some conflict, they're likely to be few.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Greco?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to the comments made by Councillor is that, as was mentioned by the officers, there is a precedent for these types of situations to occur, particularly in the inner city municipalities. Land is quite scarce, land is quite limited, and often what we see when community groups or places of worship, they usually do set up, it's unfortunate in a way, but they do set up in industrial zones. I don't think that the establishment of this centre will actually change the nature of that area. It will still be very much characterised as an industrial zone, and I think it's a suitable accommodation to have a centre of that nature in that area there, and I think that something like that helps to reflect the cultural diversity of the city, and we should welcome that.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Would any other councillors wish to speak?
I'd just like to speak in favour of the recommendation, including the additional point, but also to add that these processes can take some time. So where we are right now, should this be accepted, is that the granting of a planning permit, and then there is a process, as through the Owners Corporation, as we've heard, where hopefully some of the other matters can be addressed and negotiated. So I heard a very good spirit of goodwill from the parties, and hopefully, should this be supported, that those smaller issues of a practical and logistical nature can be navigated effectively. On that basis, I'm very happy to support it too.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Any further speakers? No, I'll put that to the vote, the recommendation to the vote with the amendment to condition 15. So all those in favour? It's carried.
Can that be noted as unanimous?
Yes, carried unanimously. So the Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the application in the next week. Okay, we'll go back to item 5.1, which is a planning permit for 708 to 710 High Street Reservoir. It might just wait till people leave. If you could please exit quietly. Okay, over to the officers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This application seeks approval to amend the existing planning permit. The changes to the planning permit proposed are to increase the floor height from 2 stories to 3 stories and add 2 additional dwellings. 5 of the 6 dwellings are 2 bedrooms, with the remaining dwelling being a single bedroom. There are a total of 5 car parking spaces provided at the rear of the development. The application also seeks a waiver of parking as detailed in page 17 of the officer's report. Open space for each of the apartments is provided in a combination of a small courtyard and balconies for 2 of the proposed apartments. The subject land is located in the general residential zone. It's unusual in its context, although in a general residential zone, its context is important to the assessment of the application. It really forms part of the broader commercial strip, High Street, being on the corner of Mason Street. So it's virtually the end of the High Street, Preston through to Reservoir commercial strip. The site does contain an existing convenience shop fronting High Street, and that's an important consideration in the officer's report in terms of parking assessment and how an existing demand is calculated. The application has been advertised. There are a total of 23 objections that have been received. These are detailed on pages 7 to 11 of the officer's report, including a response to each of those points of objection. A number of the grounds for objection, it's important to highlight, do relate to some of the factors that were considered during the original merits consideration. The ones that are given the primary consideration in the officer's report are those that relate specifically to the changes proposed. The officer's report has assessed the application as being supportable with issues such as the parking and the building mass being carefully considered. So too the site setback. And really the description for where there is variation from the standards are all justified by the site's context and where it sits in relation to other commercial buildings and the form of the site as it stands today. The application before you is therefore recommended for support, and you'll note that there are a number of changes proposed in Condition 1 which really address the amendments proposed through this application. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I will invite Ms. Pauline Malsis, the applicant, to speak. Thank you. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Pauline Maltis of Protown Planning Solutions, and I'm actually the planner who's been engaged by the applicant to represent the client throughout the process and here tonight. Thank you for the opportunity tonight. This application proposes to amend a previously approved permit which allows for the construction of a 2-storey building comprising 4 dwellings and a cafe and 5 car spaces to the rear, as previously noted. Some of this may be repeated. The current proposal is to allow for an additional level and an additional 2 dwellings. The layout of the site generally remains consistent with that previously approved. The additional dwellings are to have 2 bedrooms and 1 bedroom each, with a car parking waiver proposed, which has been substantiated through a traffic report which you should have available, undertaken by TTM Consulting Traffic Engineers. And of note is the proximity of the site to a range of public transport services, including station, 300 metres to the west, and bus routes in the immediate vicinity. You will have circulated then, as you didn't have in your material, the 3D images that were prepared, and also images just showing the subject site amongst its surrounds. And as you'll probably note, the difference between the subject site is a very tight site, and what we're proposing is obviously the high quality rejuvenation of the site. I would just like to note here tonight that following completion of the advertising, I was advised that a total of 14 objections were received, 2 being from the same property, all being of the standard format, and none being within Mason Street or nearby the site. Obviously, since time has passed and additional objections were received, I did request information as to where they were from, so I don't know exactly where they are from, as to whether they are nearby. I understand there's one objector speaking here tonight also, which I couldn't get information on 5 p.m. on Friday so that I could address those concerns specifically. But I will continue. So, as mentioned, surrounding the site is commercial to the south and west. The primary sensitive interface is obviously to the east along Mason Street. And the 3D indicates that the design has specifically been catered around that transition to maintain that additional level towards the centre of the site, away from the west and also away from the east. The key element to resolving the design for the site was the integration of the built form amongst the commercial development and the more sensitive residential development. The 3D images demonstrate the outcome of a well-resolved proposal with articulation, materials modulation and a lowering in built form towards the east, respecting the transition in the local residential area. It's lower than the commercial buildings opposite and presents a modern improvement to the streetscape. I would just like to point out a case study, which is a similar type of development, currently under construction at 541 Plenty Road, Preston, not in immediate proximity but nearby. So its similarities are that it's a multi-storey apartment development, although an additional level to this. It also has a similar context and it has an approval of 7 dwellings with a waiver of 3 car spaces for 3 of the dwellings of those 7. In concluding, I'd like to note that the proposal has a very high level of compliance with Res Code, and you will note in the report there are, I think, 3 things that are not quite in compliance, however is justified in its context. I will note that the site coverage also generally remains the same, that is the built form site coverage, and the eastern section of the site where it makes the transition into the residential area has generally retained a similar footprint and general setback from that easterly residential property. This proposal will assist in revitalising this site and centre and provides a standard of design that can be used
30 seconds.
as a benchmark for other potential future developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Maltzes. You can resume your seat in the gallery. I would now like to invite Mr Scott Farrar, an objector. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. First, I just want to state what Pauline said. Obviously, the planning there is parking opposite, and it's not public parking, it's private parking. So on your applications there, it doesn't state that. So I just want to bring that to your attention. My name is Scott Farrar, and I run a small business and live just 50 metres from this proposed amended application. Myself and many other objectors did not put in an objection to the first application advertised on Christmas Eve, as it seemed a rather small, straightforward development with car spaces for all new units and the shop. But this new amendment does not meet council guideline 3 parking, being 3 spaces short plus parking for a shop in total 4. Parking's been a real problem in the area for a very long time. Customers often comment on this. Now please remember this area is business residential, not residential only. So parking space is vital for small businesses to survive. Public transport, although good in the area, does not guarantee that each unit most do not require a car space. The area of Mason and High Street is already congested with cars parked on both sides of a narrow street. Also, the very high traffic flow from the bottle shop and several car mechanics. Safety for pedestrians and two-way traffic is a real issue. Thank you.
Thank you. You may resume your seat in the gallery. Councillors, do you have any questions? Yes, Councillor Williams.
Through you, Mayor, to the officers, are there parking restrictions along Mason Street just at the corner there at all?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there are 10-minute parking spaces in front of the site.
So there are restrictions?
Thank you.
And what about High Street? Sorry, second question.
There's the clearways, both sides, and then there's the, I think it's referred to in the reports 2 hour parking.
From 9 in the morning or something?
So the objectives are, there's certainly a reliance on the local businesses for employees to park in the high streets. And that's certainly not a question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So we have the officer recommendation in front of us. Do I have a mover and a seconder or an alternate motion?
I'm happy to move the officer recommendation as listed.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Oh, look, in considering this and obviously the compliance with Res Code, whilst there are a couple of variations, they are variations which my understanding is are fairly consistent with the original permit. What we have here is essentially a bit of a redesign and a change to some of the qualities and features of the development. They're not substantial in the sense that there is the addition of dwellings and the removal of one of the car spots. However, given the location, given the proximity to the train station and the case for a better design outcome, I'm happy to support this because I think it would be supported in other forums, and I think it's the sort of application which council or planning committee needs to make a very considered judgment on, and I think the officers have applied the appropriate conditions in order for me to feel confident supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Newton.
I think the application is reasonable and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Councillor Williams?
I object to it, where I find that it breaches the street setback, the site coverage is 65%, and the side and rear setbacks, and the wall on the boundaries, which I find is just goes a little bit, also passes the envelope, pushing the envelope outside.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Lawrence.
I'll speak in opposition to the recommendation. Fundamentally, we had an original application that's been accepted by the community there, the business community, in that it was compliant with all our guidelines. And as we heard from the objector, they didn't raise an objection to that. When you've got that such consensus, I'm not sure why we let a second bite at the cherry when we introduce breaches of our guidelines, lessening of car park and increasing of units. So I'm not supporting the recommendation.
Any other speakers? Councillor Rennie.
Madam Mayor, I'm also not going to support this because of the non-compliance issues, which include inadequate setbacks, it exceeds the building height and it exceeds site coverage and has inadequate car parking. I think it might be different if this proposal had come to us as the initial proposal and the community had fair notice that this was the proposal and fair opportunity to participate. I think that once a planning permit is issued, that is the planning permit, and I think going back and amending it and pushing the envelope in this way is not acceptable.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Yes, Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I also will not be supporting the application whilst I think that the applicant has made some sort of attempt to extend the number of dwellings, but it's also added some complications in relation to the application. I think some common ground from what I've heard tonight will be able to be found between the applicant and the objectors, and on that basis I'm going to reject the application, but I hope that the applicant and the objectors get together, because I think that they are almost there in coming to an agreed proposal.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy, would you like to close the debate?
The only comment I'd make for councillors that have indicated objection to this is there is the opportunity to obviously move amendments or to propose an alternative should this motion not succeed, which would of course enable further consultation between applicants and objectors. I'd be willing to consider that, but at this stage I've moved the motion and would stand by that moving at this stage to keep the process moving along.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? Motion lost.
And
can I move an alternate motion?
Oh, sorry.
Can I call for a division?
Hang on, one moment.
She's abstaining.
Okay. So Councillor Amir abstained?
Can I call for a division?
Yes. Sorry. All those in favour of the motion? Please stand. Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Newton. All those against, please stand. Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco, Councillor Williams, Councillor Surf and Councillor Reid. And all those abstain, please stand. Councillor Amir. Does anyone have an alternate motion?
I'm happy to move that this item be deferred to enable further consultation between the applicant and objectors, as outlined in the previous point, and for the matter to come back to a future planning committee meeting.
Do I have a second?
Look, I'm happy to second that because it's in line with what the comments that I made previously.
Thank you, Councillor Greco.
Can I just ask a question? When was the time lapse for this?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it was out of time on the 10th of October and the matter was
pushing
to be considered, so it's well and truly overdue.
Okay. I'll put that to the vote in terms of to defer, or would you like to speak to the...
If I can just speak to the deferral. There are some basic grounds here which I would have thought would have been addressed through the process. If they haven't been addressed, and there is an opportunity to achieve the compromises that Councillor Greco foreshadowed, then I think we owe it to both the applicant and objector to try to seek those. It's up to the applicant if they wish to contest Council's decision should this deferral be produced. In lieu of that, there is the option for planning committee to move a refusal, but there is no live motion at this stage. So I move a deferral to see what compromises are available and hopefully avoid both parties ending up at VCAT.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Greco, would you like to speak?
Nothing further to add.
Any other councillors wish to speak? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour for deferral? All those... Oh, carried.
And can we have that noted as unanimous, please?
Yes, carried unanimously. Okay, so we're on to item 5.4, an application for planning permit at 28 Union Street, Northcote. Officers?
Thank you, councillors. This is an application for a medium density development comprising 4 double-storey dwellings. 3 of the dwellings are 2-bedroom, dwelling 4 is a single bedroom dwelling. Councillors, 3 of the dwellings are provided with a car parking space, however 4 is not, so the applicant is proposing a waiver of 1 car parking space for this development. The application was advertised in the normal fashion, and as a result of that application, 28 received to the proposal from the local community, and a summary of the objections can be found at page 65 of the agenda. Councillors, I might start by saying that this site has some unique characteristics. It has road abuttal on 3 sides, and it is very close to the Merry train station. In addition to that, the one sensitive interface, which is number 26 Union Street, has a wall constructed for a great length of the boundary to the subject site. It has a modest open space provision, garage and access to the driveway. Councillors, the development also has a contemporary appearance, in that it is a flat roof construction. The materials on the lower level are brick, and the materials on the upper level are metal clad. Councillors, we propose that this application be supported. However, with a condition requiring that dwelling 4 be set back further from the neighbour's secluded private open space. At present, it is shown with a 2 metre setback. We propose that be increased to 3 metres. As detailed in the report, there are reductions in setbacks, but I'll put that to the fact that the site has, as I said earlier, a unique set of characteristics. So those reductions in setback have minimal, if at all, impact on the immediate neighbours in our view. So councillors, we recommend the application be supported with conditions, and in particular the requirement for the larger setback to dwelling 4, which is already noted in the list of conditions. So we recommend that a notice of decision be issued with conditions. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. I invite Mr James Winstanley, the applicant, to speak. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, councillors. My name is James Winstanley. I'm the applicant for 28 Union Street and also joint owner of the property. I just want to take the opportunity to point out a couple of things in relation to the report that's in front of you. For example, the owner's details on this report are the previous owners. At the time of application, we hadn't settled the property yet. It's now owned by family members, all young, trying to find an opportunity to move into the area. Obviously, as we know, it's difficult these days with property prices and whatnot. And I'll get on to more business end of things, but basically just a few other points. No consultants are listed, but the plans have been detailed by DesignWorks Architecture. There was a planning submission report done by Planning and Property Partners, and a traffic report done by Traffics Group. So we've certainly taken the advice of professionals in this case. Brief history, we've also considered council's advice throughout the whole process as well. So pre-purchase, I spoke to Craig Murphy from the Planning Department, who acknowledged that the site was suitable for development. We've worked with the Planning Officer, Jolyon Boyle, for over 12 months now. So, bless you. Yeah, so I mean, our pre-application meeting was in September last year. It's been a long process, but we feel like we've achieved what council were looking for and what we are happy with. It mentions here that 20 objections were received. I'd just like to point out that 3/4 of those were some distance away, to 10 kilometres. The remaining objections were largely around the parking situation, with that one space being, we're seeking a waiver for one space. In response to that, obviously I think we have the council traffic engineers support based on the report that we got from Traffics Group, and I guess, you know, from our perspective, looking at the site, the location of this site, comparison to, for example, the 172A Station Street with a large reduction. This is actually a superior site to that. We're directly across the road from the station, a stone's throw from the Merry Creek bike trail, and walking distance to both tram lines on High Street and St George's Road. So then the other objection with the most weight, as mentioned, was the next door neighbour at 26 Union Street. I'd like to point out that before we submitted our application, I did we had a meeting informally. I explained what we were looking to do, and I sent a set of plans prior to the application, just inviting any feedback prior to the whole formal planning process. That invitation wasn't taken up. We did receive an objection, and we just ended up going through the proper channels and working with council to work towards that. We have no objection to this condition of setting back that additional metre at dwelling number 4. And I would also note that that was done, I guess, in negotiation with the planning officers, and the resident of 26, as far as I'm aware, isn't aware of that change, proposed change. So those are the main points I wanted to highlight, and I guess just say generally that we are very keen to obtain a planning permit for this site and want to get building and move into it. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr Winstanley. You can resume your seat in the gallery. There are no objectors registered to speak, so I'll open up for council's questions. Councillor Amir?
May I ask, this information may or may not be available, but could you ask the officers whether the brick wall along the perimeter of number 26 extends the full length of the block?
Officers?
Through you, Madam Chair. No, it doesn't. It extends close to the end of dwelling 3, just short of the end of dwelling 3. Then there's a section of open space proposed alongside the neighbour's open space and garage.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Just picking up on a comment made by the applicant regarding a proposed condition that may not have been communicated to the relevant objector, being the adjoining property. Can we just get clarification from our officers about whether such communication has occurred or whether a response has been received?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't believe that has been communicated to the neighbour, no.
Okay.
Thank you.
We didn't believe it was absolutely necessary either, because what we're proposing is an increase in setback, so the building will be set further from the neighbour's property, so in our view, an improvement for the neighbour.
Further questions? Yeah. Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, could I just, through you, Madam Chair, ask the officers how this 100% double-storey housing format fits within the housing needs and the Darebin housing strategy in terms of access?
Councillors, what is proposed here is a form of housing that allows, well, there's 1 and 2 bedroom accommodation. The fact that it is attached throughout, in our view, is a direct response to the context of the site. As I mentioned in my presentation earlier, the site has a unique context. It's not an infill site. Hence, the attached construction, in our view, at the officers' level, is that it will not impact on the immediate neighbours because of attached construction.
Madam Chair, just through you, I might ask a supplementary question to be a bit more specific.
Yes.
Specifically in relation to Darebin housing policy in terms of access for people with disabilities and aged residents seeking downsizing, how does this proposal stack up?
Officers?
Councillor, it does create an impact because it is two-storey construction, so it won't be as accessible to all. It will be accessible to the more mobile residents of Darabin.
Thank you.
Councillor Rennie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The additional setback, does that change the site coverage? Because at the moment it is in excess of the allowable 60%. By setting it back, is that...
Just a reminder that all questions are to be directed through the chair.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't believe it does. What we're proposing is an increase in the setback of the first wall, so the actual coverage on the lower level remains the same.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
No, happy to move the recommendation.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Williams, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Look, there is a couple of things that they have pushed the boundary. The fact that it's close and opposite the railway station, I feel that it does allow that little bit more area that where coverage can occur. Where if it was a normal street, I probably would have a different opinion. So in saying that, I'm in favour.
Thank you, Councillor Amir.
I would second Councillor Williams' comments that the location of Mary Station is relevant for me in the consideration of this site, and also in regards to overshadowing, which was something that I was aware of in looking at these plans, that much of, part of that will be onto areas that are, let me repeat that, the shift from the current site to the proposed site, the change in overshadowing will be lower than might have been first interpreted from the papers.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Lawrence.
I'll speak against the recommendation, Madam Chair. Just briefly, obviously there are a number of these smaller sites along the Northcote and Thornbury area, in particular, adjacent to stations. We've had one recently where we did support the development of it on a very small block that was two-storey. But I suppose I wonder about our intentions as a council in terms of implementing our housing policy if we're willing to overlook breaches of guidelines, impacts on number 26 as well, and not get any net outcome in single storey. And when I look at this proposal, I wonder if there was a single storey at the rear and less impact on number 26, whether we actually have a better outcome.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? No? Councillor Williams, would you like to close?
Nothing further to add.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That's carried.
I'd call for a division, Madam Chair.
Okay, all those in favour, please stand. I name Councillor Newton, Councillor Williams, Councillor Surf, Councillor Amir, Councillor McCarthy. All those against, please stand. It's Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco and Councillor Rennie. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 5.5, application for planning permit at 346 to 350 Bell Street, Preston. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This application is also an amendment to an existing planning permit. It's been granted for a 6-storey building at 346 to 350 Bell Street, Preston. In particular, the application seeks approval to reduce the number of dwellings from 83 to 78, and that's primarily the result of converting 15 single-bedroom dwellings to 10 two-bedroom dwellings. The application also reduces the parking to accord with the planning scheme still from 71 to 66 spaces. The application also changes a previous car stacker configuration to provide a basement only car parking option. One of the key considerations and the purpose of the report is screening. The application was approved with opaque glass on the north elevation. A lot of that has now changed to louvers, and there's quite a detailed commentary within the officer's report on those arrangements. Now, since the report was written, Madam Chair, there have been 5 objections received. The objections do centre on a number of matters relating to the original merits of the application, but there are a particular focus on overlooking and perceived loss of privacy. And the report before you does consider those concerns and assesses the application as complying with the relevant standards. It often is of concern to residents where the standards require or allow up to 25% permeability. There's actually less than that through the louver arrangements, and there are diagrams within the plans that you can view to see how that change is made from the previous opaque screening. The application before you is recommended for support. It is an adequate and suitable replacement of screening options, and it's been assessed as complying with the relevant standards in B22 of the Darabin Planning Scheme. The application is recommended for support.
Thank you. I have 3 objectors registered to speak. I invite Jenny Cottrell and David Reynolds. No, they're not here. I also have Nicholas and Paula Preshaw. I invite you to come down and speak.
Nicholas is again, should have a Siobhan Jordan on there as well.
Yes, that's right.
So
Yep.
it could be following myself.
Would you like to come? Would you like to come down together? Yes. Okay. So you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds each to speak.
Well, we actually registered separately, but we can't sit together if that's okay.
That's fine. Yep. No worries.
Our concern is mine is I'm the property at 3 English Street, which is immediately behind the proposed building. I don't have any objection to anything other than the overlooking or perceived overlooking, as it's been referred to. It overlooks my secluded private space. It's my back garden. I would simply seek to have reassurances that any view from any story or any window or balcony on the northern face, at which a person can actually walk up to it and look down, irrespective of how far it is. If they can look down and see into my secluded private space, my back garden, then I would consider myself to actually be being overlooked, not perceived to be being overlooked. It's really important that that point is made. My neighbour and friend here has a photograph of one of the developments that's recently been constructed, and it's a photograph from her back garden of a balcony that doesn't have opaque screening or any other form of screening. We were told that they would not be able to overlook. We took this from the back garden. You have 2 views of it. We chose not to take a picture at the time when the person who stands out on that balcony and looks into my neighbour's back garden. Fortunately, they can't see into mine because I'm partially screened by trees at the moment. We chose not to take a photograph when they were out on their balcony because we respected their privacy. So we're simply asking if Council can please consider our concerns and ensure that all of those views are actually screened in some way. We have no objection to the screening that includes those slats or roofs or whatever they're called. Because as I understand it, if you step up to them, you can actually see out, but you can't see down. It allows maximum natural light into the buildings, which are already quite small, so it will certainly improve
30 seconds
of those people living in it. Nor do we mind the opaque glass that's been used on the buildings there, and that does actually give us some privacy. I would just ask that you would actually look at the factual situation rather than what it might or might not be, and respect my open space. Thank you.
Thank you. And so Siobhan Jordan.
Paula Preshaw.
Oh, sorry, you're Siobhan. Sorry, Paula Preshaw.
Yeah, basically I agree with everything that Siobhan has said. Just some history back when we purchased the property queue behind us, and we went through the whole process where it was rezoned as PDZ. So now we have 6 stories, 5 stories behind us. We have no right of appeal to speak that. We have to rely on council. And the photographs which we sent around clearly show that inadequate screening means that we have loss of privacy. So the only thing I'm concerned about really is the reduction in screening and the protection of our privacy.
Thank you. You may resume your seat in the gallery. Do councillors have questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Just following on from the objectors' concerns raised regarding reduction in screening, if I can just get a comment from our officers about what conditions may be available to Planning Committee, should the Planning Committee choose to support the changes to improve the privacy and reduce the overlooking as raised by the two objectors.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. All the officers can recommend is that there's compliance with the relevant standard in the planning scheme, and as a minimum that means that there's got to be 25 or no more than 25% permeability. There are some sketches and diagrams there that show how the louvers are proposed, and that's really to demonstrate that an individual would have to go to considerable effort to overlook into someone's backyard. That's not to say they couldn't, but they would have to go through quite an effort to be able to do that. And really all we can apply and legitimately enforce at the end of the day is something that requires absolute compliance with the standard. And that's essentially what the recommendation before you is attempting to do.
Thank you.
Just a supplementary to that, in terms of engagement with objectors in relation to those conditions, which are the standard conditions.
Through the chair, please.
Sorry. Would it be correct to assume that that's been explained in terms of the limitations that council has?
Yes. Look, Madam Chair, I'm not sure what discussions have had directly with the residents, but I know we'd only be too happy to go through the diagrams that we have. The application is still public and will be for a period of 60 days after it's decided. So the documents and contents of information and the basis for which the officer has assessed the application, we're more than happy to sit down and explain how that position was arrived at and how we're satisfied the standards are complied with. The difficulty is that an applicant may demonstrate that they've got 90% obscurity, but they comply with the planning scheme requirements. And there's the big concern that is often raised by residents is that there's still 10% permeability.
So just a further supplementary in relation to that, which is what scope is available to Planning Committee to defer the consideration of this until the next meeting to enable further engagement with the objectors and also the applicant regarding consideration of improved screening options given the concerns that have been raised. I'm not sure where we are within the statutory timeframes.
Madam Mayor, it's well over the statutory period now. The matter's been waiting for decision for some time. We're extremely limited at the professional capacity to request something that's in excess of the standard in the planning scheme. Often we find though that with screening developments will achieve in excess of what the planning scheme requires. That's the officer's assessment in this case, but a final percentage. He was of the view that in some cases he wouldn't be able to see the properties at all. But could someone view through if they went to an effort? They probably could. But we wouldn't be recommending a deferral. We'd be recommending a decision because if it wasn't, it's certainly a position we could put to the applicant, but it'd be difficult to do at this late stage, given what we're asking for is in excess of the standard.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Just a very quick question. I just wanted to get an understanding of, in relation to the original application, whether that was approved by council or approved by VCAT.
Officers?
I'll just have to check, Chair. I can't recall off the top of my head. The fact is it's got a permit. And that's what we'd be looking at assessment. I think it was a council decision. I don't recall a matter of
Thank you. Councillor Amir?
Yeah, it's just a further clarification, sorry to be focusing on this issue, but the officers referred to, I guess, two factors. One was the permeability of the screens, and the second was the visibility of the private open space. I was wondering, do we have any information about, in this case, in the unit that would allow the most overlooking, what proportion of private open space may be visible?
Officers?
Look, at this stage I'm not able to provide that information, Madam Chair, about what degree of in excess of compliance. I've reviewed a report that the officers assessed as achieving compliance with the standard in all cases. There's some commentary also in the report just to help you to explain those requirements change much further than 9 metres away.
Okay.
And that is often a concern, and often you'll find before the committee there are photos or information produced, and often complaints received where there is certainly overlooking. There's compliance with the planning scheme because the balconies are greater than 9 metres at a 45-degree angle.
Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Madam Chair, through you to the officers. I just have one question about the screening measures to the north elevation in the original application that's been passed. And my question is, do they comply with the relevant techniques and standards?
Officers?
Madam Mayor, yes, they did. The previous approval showed opaque glass, and the application before you isn't to change all of the screening. It's a selection of them which are highlighting in the plans and within the report.
Any other questions? Councillor Rennie?
Yes, we ask if the developer has given any indication of why they've made that decision to change the screening from the initial application.
Officers?
My understanding is to do with light penetration into the balcony and into the living spaces. It's to enhance that for more hours during the day. So it's to reduce the reliance on internal lighting.
Thank you. Any further questions? We have the officer recommendation in front of us. Do I have a mover and seconder or an alternate motion? Or an alternate motion?
Are we able to pass an alternate motion requesting that the initial screens as per the initial plan be maintained but allowing for the other changes?
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Oh, sorry. Officers?
Madam Chair, you can require that use. I'll have to think about how that's worded.
Could I, just in view of making conditions up on the spot, which I'm not sure if that's available to us at the moment, propose that this actually be deferred to the next meeting, which is, I think, in the next week or two, the next planning committee meeting. I'd seek clarification in relation to that, to allow the provision of appropriate conditions to be considered by council.
Through you, Madam Chair, the next council meeting on the 5th of December, so it will be moved to the
So Councillor Rennie put forward an alternate motion. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Williams? Councillor Rennie, do you wish to speak to the motion? Or actually, we might clarify the motion first.
So the motion is that we seek a slightly modified proposal which would include the screening from the first plans with the other amended plans to be approved as per the officer recommendation. So it's a hybrid, if you were, but that following on from Councillor McCarthy's idea that we would actually revisit that with a formally written up motion in a fortnight's time.
It's a deferment, really.
Through you, Madam Chairperson, we had a motion put forward to have a slightly amended
design
to do with first, and that was to have the screens replaced with what was in the previous, but obviously not be able to assist solely in relation to
deal with it on the spot.
Officers?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would simply, you can add a condition 1 to request that the screening, that Council not agree to the alternative screens proposed in the amended application, and that those approved on the original planning permit are maintained. That would be sufficient direction for the appropriate decision to be circulated to all parties.
Do we need to remove any of the conditions?
No, it's just an added
Yep, okay.
dot point.
We need to get that written down.
Just wait for the correct wording.
Check.
Yeah, we need the right correct wording.
No, I was just checking that. Yeah. Does Councillor already know? Or do you want me to hang So the proposed change to the condition is to insert condition 1J, that the screens to balconies for the north elevation be opaque glass to comply with standard B22. Do you accept that, Councillor Rennie?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And second?
Yes, I do.
Would you like to speak to that motion?
Yes, look, I think it would be good if we could, by and large, approve the amended plans here tonight to the extent that they represent some improvement on the plans that were in place in terms of greater dwelling diversity and a reduction in car parking. The reduction in the use of stackers, I think, is good. So I think that this is an improvement. I think that we don't want to achieve that improvement at the expense of adequate screening to other residents in the area, and so if we can achieve both of those outcomes, that would be very good, and I'd support that.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
Considering it's a large site and what's being built there, and the only issue that the surrounding neighbours are having is obviously overlooking, if we can resolve that here in the chamber rather than going to VCAT or having residents in, you know, in anxiousness of what's to happen, perception can be a big also fault. Even though some people say that it's not an issue, to me it is, because we don't know, as a neighbour, you don't know what's being built. And if it's going to create anxiousness and that anxiety within the residents, it can cause a lot of animosity. So if we can resolve that here in the chamber, I think that'd be great.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak?
Just a comment.
Councillor Newton?
I've got a bit of a concern that there are people that will be living in these apartments that are built, and I live in an apartment and I know that natural light's incredibly important, and I think that we need to consider the residents that will be living in the apartments.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor McCarthy, we put forward the... Did you want that to have a look at that?
I understand it's just the inclusion of the additional point
Yes,
as
yep.
outlined by Councillor Rennie, returning to the original glass, if that's correct. Yep.
Councillor Rennie, would you wish to close the debate?
Can we now put that motion?
Yes, of course. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Okay, moving to item 5.6, application for planning permit, lot 9, 1056 to 1140 Plenty Road, Bundoora. Officers?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This application fits in with a development plan that was approved by Council on the 8th of December 2015. And during that process, that is where public notice was provided. And the officer has assessed this application and sure it accords with the key directions from that development plan that was approved and adopted previously by Council. It's important to point out when that development plan was advertised, there were no objections received. So before these applications are processed, they are checked to ensure that there is general accordance with the development plan previously approved. This site has some significance. It was an issue 12 to 18 months ago concerning antisocial behaviour around Gunilla Crescent. This particular site, when developed, provides a separation buffer between some of the heritage buildings that were the centre of this activity and the residents that were affected by some of the antisocial behaviour. It also restores one of the 4 heritage buildings. 2 are under restoration currently as part of a redevelopment occurring on Lot 7 within the Polaris estate. This particular application, in addition to the heritage building, proposes a number of townhouses and a 4-storey apartment. In total, combined with the heritage buildings, there are 63 dwellings. The site itself is included in a mixed-use zone and has that broad strategic support with this level of intensification close to the local town centre. In terms of materials, there's quite a good standard. It's already been set in the Polaris estate with its apartments and with the townhouses, and these are well-designed apartments and townhouses, certainly achieving good outcomes in terms of natural light, ventilation and internal amenity. The location and built form and appearance are also in accordance with directions previously through the development plan approval process. The only deviation to note is an assessment that was undertaken for one of the larger trees on the site, and within the planning permit conditions that are proposed, there is a compensation payment required for the offset of that tree, which is sitting between where the townhouse sites are and the proposed apartment. Now that is not an indigenous tree, it is an exotic that does have landscaping, and the details of that are included within the officer's report. The application before you recommends that the application be supported subject to conditions.
Thank you. There are no applicants or objectors registered to speak, so Councillor.
Sorry, Madam, I
sorry.
should mention there's a preliminary matter. There was a, I'm sorry for not doing this earlier, there was a request from the applicant to consider the deletion of condition 1C. Now, 1C, now, unfortunately the applicant was unable to appear this evening. Condition 1C simply refers to the deletion of front fencing. Now, Lot 7, which is directly adjacent to this site, does have front fences to the townhouse section, as does this proposal. I'm suggesting tonight there's no objection at an officer level if those conditions are made consistent with Lot 7 in relation to fencing. My apologies for that.
I'm happy to move the officer recommendation with that addition of...
Does anyone have any questions before we move to that? Councillor McCarthy?
Just, can we just get some clarity, and I'm just trying to see where it is listed in the report, where the compensation payment that's proposed, where that goes to, and what purpose that's put to, and whether that can be tied as a condition.
Yeah, it is. It's certainly a condition that can be applied and will be applied if the permit is supported. What has happened, it has happened previously in the Polaris estate where there have been trees identified in good faith at an early stage and have not been able to be maintained. Those offset plantings as a priority go back to the local area. In fact, have led to landscape improvements near Council's Oval or the Village Green, which is also around the community centre, and spaces nearby. Speaking to our Parks and Garden staff, that's a similar intent should this compensation payment be made.
So just
Councillor McCarthy,
if I could, thank you. Just a supplementary to that, condition 18, I believe it is, which specifies the sum of $55,658, which is adjusted as required. It says here, if I'm correct in reading this, is to be made to council as compensation for the removal of the tree, less any agreed offsets. If I can just get some clarification as to what that second part of the statement, less any agreed offsets, actually means in practice.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. What the applicant can do is they can do additional landscape works on council land there and fund those works. So, for example, they could do some additional landscape works in the village green, provide mature trees where they might be specified in a landscape plan that council's already prepared.
I'd like to,
McCarthy?
on the basis of that, the mover and seconder, I'd like to propose that the words less any agreed offsets be deleted from clause 18, so that it would simply be that the payment is clear and specific and not reduced based on internal landscaping undertaken by the applicant. So if the mover and seconder...
And the seconder?
And I would also ask, just through our officers, whether it is possible to, in that condition, to specify how council will use that or what that will be applied to in terms of that amount of money.
Just if you address your question through the chair.
Sorry, I apologise, Chair. Whether it's possible to specify in the condition how that will be applied, that money will be applied once received.
Officers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, all I can do is quote a recent example on the site. There were some mature palm trees that were attempted to save but didn't survive. Part of the offset requirement for those were provided nearby, and the applicant was advised of the manner in which that would occur and were consulted in how that particular, how those funds were to be spent. There is, as a general principle, through planning applications where you receive private contributions or as offsets, there is usually an accountability test that you indicate back to the applicant where those funds are to be spent to ensure there's benefit to the contributing property.
Thank you.
On that basis, I won't propose any further amendments, but I think the matter can be taken up in a separate forum.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? So the recommendation that we have before us includes removal of condition 1C and changes to condition 18 to remove the words less any agreed offsets.
Yes, that's correct.
That's acceptable. Does the mover wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, please, Madam Chair. Look, it's wonderful to see this application finally, this section of development finally come to council. It has been, this site, local residents have been waiting for it to be developed for over 20 years, and I'm reminded that actually I think it's about 4 governments ago that actually gave the money for the community centre to be built near here, the Northeastern Hub, and that was whatever it was, Vic Urban or whatever its name was at the time. So there was a large contribution of millions of dollars to restore the hub that is across the park from this. This section in Quasar Court with the car park, the diagonal car park, has been proven to be a very bad antisocial behaviour gathering point. It's basically been a meeting point for car enthusiasts who then go and meet in other places in the northern suburbs, and disrupted people from 6 p.m. through to 2 a.m. I myself have been there at 1 p.m. and been confronted with 40 males gathering there. Now, so this development will actually give the residents near Quasar Court and on Gunella Crescent some level of residential amenity and safety, and restore the promise that this development has always had, which was actually to develop a former psychiatric hospital to a high standard of residential amenity. I won't go into the tree issue. Obviously, there is an incredible amount of habitat protection and tree protection in this zone. There's probably the highest variety of bird life in Darebin around here because of that level of protection, and it also is a residential area that sits next to Creswell Forest, Creswell Hill and Bundura Park, so it's actually an incredibly green area of the city. So this development, while medium density, respects that and obviously respects the green areas banking onto Gunella Crescent and the existing residents there. So I look forward to its construction.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams?
Nothing further to add.
Is there any other councillor which wish to speak? Councillor McCarthy.
Look, I'm going to speak against this, and it's reluctant. While I appreciate the mover and seconder amending condition 18, I just would draw councillors' attention to page 105 of the report, which outlines the planning arborist's assessment, which makes the point that the tree in question, which of course in this case would have a compensation payment applied for, is considered to be healthy and retainable, and there has obviously been an effort by the planning arborist in their recommendation to try to encourage some form of retention of that. So I'm disappointed that that has not resulted in occurring in the final design outcome, and this is a repeat issue that we have in these sites. So whilst the compensation is welcome, the reality here is that there has been some effort, and I would like to see in future with these sorts of developments that greater effort is done to maintain and retain the vegetation where possible. So on that basis, we're just missing that one point. So on that basis, I can't support the recommendations listed.
Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I'd like to support the proposal, but I'd like to include an additional condition as an amendment to the application. I'll read out the conditions so that people can. I think it may have been circulated earlier this afternoon, but the condition is this. I'll read out the condition, then I'll give some background to why I put this condition. That condition 20, that's the additional condition, that before development commences, details of temporary fencing proposed to secure the construction site are to be submitted and approved by the responsible authority, to include fencing that is screened from Gunella Crescent and that is respectful of the neighbourhood character. If I may
Happy
speak,
to accept that condition.
And the seconder?
Absolutely.
Yep. Councillor Greco.
If I may quickly, I won't go through the other points that have been raised by councillors. in relation to the substance of the application. But with this particular point here, as it was mentioned by Councillor Lawrence, there's, over the last 18 months, I think the officers also mentioned there was a lot of antisocial behaviour in that particular area. It required a lot of time to be invested by the developers and also council, and a lot of public money had to be spent in relation to addressing the antisocial behaviour, and council had to incur put a lot of resources and time to try and address that. Even the police had to be involved. So there was a lot of public expense for the developers to ensure that they maintain the property, or that site, that it didn't facilitate antisocial behaviour. So why I'm proposing this additional condition is that we have to ensure that whilst the construction site is in process, that there is adequate fencing to protect the site from any future antisocial behaviour. As Councillor Lawrence mentioned, people are really looking forward to the development, and that the fencing has to be appropriate, and also that the fencing is respectful of the neighbourhood character.
Just a clarification that amendment be condition number 21.
Oh, 21.
20.
I apologise for that.
Yeah. Is there any other speakers? No? I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So the Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. So moving on to item 5.7, which is an application for planning permit at 429 Heidelberg Road, Fairfield. I'd like to make a short statement before I hand it over to the officers. I wish to state that whilst I have previously made a statement about my then position on this matter, I now speak as a councillor and as such recognise and accept that I have a statutory responsibility to represent and act in the best interests of the Darebin community when participating in the decision making of this council. Accordingly, I will keep an open mind by considering all information both in favour of and against the matter before objectively casting my vote.
Madam Mayor, if I might make a similar statement.
Yes, Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. I wish to state that whilst I previously have made statements about my then position on this matter, I now speak as a councillor and as such recognise and accept that I have a statutory responsibility to represent and act in the best interests of the Darebin community when participating in the decision making of this council. Accordingly, I'll keep an open mind by considering all information both in favour of and against the matter before objectively casting my vote.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Officers.
This application seeks approval for an extension of time request. It's to extend the time for a planning permit granted by VCAT, which provides gaming machines at the Grandview Hotel in Station Street, Heidelberg Road, Fairfield. The application's been called up at the request of the councillor. Typically these matters are decided under delegation, and it is understood and appreciated that the subject is of concern and community interest. The application before you sets out various tests, and in particular there's a Supreme Court test that is applied to extensions of time request. And it provides 3 essential criteria or tests to whether these matters are appropriate for consideration of support or not. They are, in terms of, in summary, there needs to be significant policy change, there needs to be a demonstration that perhaps the case has been warehoused, or that the policy has shifted significantly or varied to the degree that it warrants a different consideration. The report before you takes you through those considerations. It also takes you through some of the matters that sit outside the Planning Environment Act and relevant planning considerations in deliberating on these matters.
It is noted that there is a council policy that discourages, and there was strong opposition to the application when the merits were decided. A lot of that is unable to be considered, and the reasons for that are explained in the report and the Mayor. The application before you is recommended that the extension of time be supported.
Thank you. I now invite the applicant's representative, Mr. Dennis McNeice, to speak. Thank you. You have got 5 minutes.
Madam Chair and councillors, and congratulations to the new councillors. The reason why I'm speaking, I'm actually a general manager of Northcote Park Football Club, also a Darwin resident of over 50 years, MFB fireman for 32, avid member of a lot of sporting groups within the Darwin Council, was founding member of Preston Bland Junior Football Club, and also assisted in the redevelopment of the Preston CEO. I'm now, as General Manager of Northcote Park Football Club. These club entitlements will be in the Northcote Park Football Club and Netball Club name. I'm also now dealing with the council officers and also an architect and the cricket club to develop the Bill Lorry Oval. I'm just speaking in favour, just to inform the councils of what we're trying to do as a club. A lot of these are to reassure the council that they will be club entitlements and the money will be spent in the community. And also as a club, as everyone knows, women's football is right up in the forefront of everyone's mind. We also entertain that great idea. We have netball, we have a lot of women's football out, but we need, the ground is old, we need new change rooms, we need new amenities for our women. So that's why I'm speaking on behalf of this. So it's probably a bit different than normal, but once again, thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you for your time. You may resume your seat in the gallery. Councillors, do you have questions?
Chair, I don't have a question. I have foreshadowed with councillors prior to the meeting that I would consider putting forward a deferment motion in relation to this item, given the complexity of the planning and policy issues which come into clash, as was outlined by our officers, and also issues that have been raised by the applicant as well, which I think bear consideration. So if I can, unless there's any questions, I'd like to read a motion that's alternative to what's in the report.
Are there any questions before we move to the motion? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. So the alternative motion is that Planning Committee defer this application to be heard at a future council meeting to enable receipt of legal advice and other advice in relation to council's options, given current policy positions and other relevant factors.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Rennie. I should note I was the councillor that requested this be called in because of the complexity of the space and the strong community concern. Whatever consideration council makes in relation to this item, it's going to be complex and needs to be well grounded. This application is actually not a fresh application for approval of EGMs, but an extension of time, and as a result, it doesn't therefore attract the failure to decide provisions that would usually apply. Therefore, there is no issue in terms of having a short delay in our consideration of this to make sure we get our decision right. I don't want to prejudge what that decision would be, but I do believe that there are some complex issues in relation to this matter, some of which relate to Council's current policy setting, state policy settings, the complexity of what's proposed, and where we've gotten to up until now. I would note that there is a history to this application, which was that it was not supported by Council, and Council opposed the original application for EGMs at the Victorian Gaming Commission, Gaming Liquor Regulation Commission. This is not the application, the substantive application, it's an extension of time, and so a range of issues need to be considered in terms of how we tackle this. So on that basis, I'm proposing that this be deferred to a future council meeting, and following, if this is supported, that council would get legal advice in relation to all of our options going forward and in relation to our policy positions.
Thank you. Councillor Rennie, do you wish to speak?
Yes, very briefly, I think that this is not a simple matter because, in fact, in 2012, the Victorian Commission for Gaming and Liquor Regulation granted a licence to the Grandview Hotel, and that was a hotel licence for the operation of electronic gaming machines. We're now hearing for the first time that those machines are going to be operated by a club. That would call into question the initial licence decision, and I think we need to know more about that, given that half the machines in the state are operated by hotels and the other half by clubs. So that's actually not a straightforward procedure. That will re-trigger an application to the VCGLR, and I think the planning permit likewise was granted to the Grandview Hotel on the understanding these were machines that would be operated by a hotel. So I think fully exploring that and looking at all of the implications of that change, which is very significant, is worthwhile.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Lawrence?
Just a question through you, Madam Chair, to the officers. Just in regards to a deferral, I didn't hear a date. Can we get some advice about what are likely options for the applicant?
Officer?
In a deferral. Yeah, Madam Mayor, the key issue is when the permit expires, and there's a 6-month window after the permit expires under the legislation. That's the critical time path. The applicant is protected elsewhere through VCAT legislation. There's a catch-all provision, so whilst there's not the opportunity to appeal under failure, there's a general administrative opportunity that allows an appeal to be lodged to review any particular matter.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions?
Just through you, Madam Chair, to the mover, if I could just be clear, there's a deferral but there's no date for it to be heard.
So
Councillor McCarthy?
Thank you, Chair. This is following consultation with our officers prior to the meeting about the issues around specifying a date versus specifying a future council meeting. I'd be happy to add the words as soon as practicable, which is a standard phrase that we would use in these motions, which at least demonstrates goodwill in terms of the efficiency of the receipt of advice, but I would be loath to put a specific date because it's dependent upon the receipt of advice. And we have 2 more council meetings this year, and then we don't sit again until February. So on that basis, I would be happy to add the words as soon as practicable, if that provides comfort to Councillor Lawrence, but certainly I'm loath to add a specific date at this stage.
Is the seconder happy with those additional words?
Yes.
Well, may I move them as an amendment, perhaps?
Okay. Councillor Lawrence?
I move that those words are included.
Happy to accept those words as clearly indicated.
Okay, so that's accepted? Yep. Is there any other speakers to this item? Councillor Lawrence?
I'd like to speak for the alternate motion at this point, and obviously I do so in the anticipation this will be dealt with in a timely manner, and seeking further information about this is certainly not any indication of my opinions on it. I understand the Council's policies in relation to gaming outcomes, but I think we've also got to be mindful of our requirement to exercise procedural fairness in existing applications in particular. So I'll be looking at all the advice when it comes back.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'll put that to the vote now. All those in favour of the alternate motion to defer this application to a future council meeting as soon as practicable? All those in favour? Carried.
Was that unanimous?
Yes, unanimous.
Could we have that noted?
So the next item is 5.8, application for planning permit at 658 to 664 High Street, Thornbury. I declared a conflict earlier in the meeting. I have an indirect interest because of a residential amenity effect, and the nature of this interest is that I am purchasing a property in close proximity to the property under application. So I will ask Councillor Greco to take the chair.
Councillors, before us we have application 5.8 on the agenda, the application for planning permit D/1039/2015 in regards to 658 to 664 High Street, Thornbury. Can we have a report from our officers, please?
Thank you, Councillors. I might start by first advising Council that an application for review has been lodged for this application. So Council will be forming an opinion, not a decision, as a matter will proceed before VCAT. This application is for a mixed-use development over 6 levels with associated car parking at the first floor level of the building. The existing buildings on the site, with the exception of the ground floor component on the corner, that is the bank, are to be demolished. At the ground level, the existing commercial premises with a floor area of 248 square metres will be retained and will continue to be occupied by the bank. A new commercial premises is also proposed alongside with a floor area of 165 square metres. Vehicular access will be via the middle laneway, where a car waiting bay and car lift have been provided. The residential lobby and services are also located to the rear of the building at the ground level, being accessible from both Clarendon Street and the adjacent car waiting bay. A total of 28 apartments are proposed, 16 one-bedroom and 12 two-bedroom. At the first floor level, 26 car spaces are to be provided, and they'll be in the form of an automated car stacker system. Individual storage cages and 29 bicycle spaces are also provided to the building. Access to all levels is provided by a central stairway and lift. Internal landscaping is provided at level 2 with a void above to allow for daylight into the building to select bedrooms. Levels 2 to 5 contain residential apartments with east, west and south orientations to High Street, the rear laneway and Clarendon Street respectively. The apartments fronting Clarendon Street split over 2 levels, with kitchen and living rooms on the lower levels, level 2 and 4, and 2 bedrooms, and combined bathroom, laundry on the upper levels, level 3 and 5. Each dwelling is provided with balcony space ranging between 8 and 14 square metres. In addition, the proposal includes a roof containing open and covered common areas, a rooftop garden for the residents, and that is also accessed via a lift. The maximum height of the building is 23.4 metres, and the materials and finishes include rendered concrete, decorative brickwork, perforated metal, timber panels and steel. Councillors, this application was advertised in a normal fashion, attracting 18 objections from the local community, and the objections are summarised on page 125 and 126 of the agenda. Councillors, it is important to identify that from a policy point of view, this area, or this site, has been identified to accommodate a building of a mixed-use nature of up to 6 levels. In addition to that, the site does have a unique context. Most of the larger mixed-use developments that we see built on High Street have a stepped setback from the residential interface. This site is unique because it doesn't have that sensitive residential interface. It has an abutment to a right-of-way and a car park, commercial properties to the north, a road network to the south and to the west. The other component of the project is that the entire car parking provision is to be a stacker system. And unique to that also is that a car lift will allow the vehicles to enter the first floor level. So again, there's no conventional parking proposed, there's no basement here. Car lift brings the vehicle up to the first level and the vehicles are arranged in a stacker system. I I did mention earlier that the provision of open spaces in the form of balconies, and that ranges from 8 to 14 square metres in area, plus the rooftop garden area. The development also presents with a commercial component at the lower level and a replication of residential component above. Councillors, we are of the view that the project is supportable. We recommend the application is supported with conditions. Thank you.
And thank you for that report. Could I please ask the applicant, Vaughan Connor, to come forward? Do you mind moving the microphone towards you? Yep. You have 5 minutes to make your submission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow councillors. My name is Vaughan Connor. I'm a director at Contour Consultants, and we're here on behalf of the owner and the permit applicant. And we've been managing this proposal since its inception, and we've collaborated over a long period of time with council officers on different issues which have been raised. The result of this collaboration is a recommendation to grant a planning permit, and we ask that council support its officer's recommendation and endorse the project. What's before the council and the subject of the officer's report is a mixed-use building that comprises reworking of the existing National Australia Bank tenancy on the ground floor, a new retail tenancy to its north also on the ground floor, car parking for 26 vehicles, access from the rear laneway to the east, and 28 residential apartments. Now, in addition to the overarching support from council's officers, we also note that the application has been assessed and is supported by council's capital works team, council's transport department, council's property department, council's urban designer, and council's ESD department. We've also had to refer the application to Melbourne Water, and they've supported the proposal as well. Insofar as the key issues associated with the application as raised in the objections, these can probably be summarised as the buildings and works, or the actual building, the parking provision, and the shared use of the rear laneway. In response to these issues, and firstly in relation to the building and works component, this site is specifically referenced in the planning scheme, and it's in the Clause 22 local policy, which is relevant to the High Street corridor. Now, this policy positively encourages the redevelopment of the site, and it specifically states, and I quote, "To encourage development of sites south of Clarendon Street and immediately north of Clarendon Street on the east side of High Street, open brackets numbers 630 to 656 and numbers 658 to 668 High Street and 6 Clarendon Street for new anchor attractions or residential development in mid to high-rise buildings." The same policy as a design guideline then goes on and states, in the area of the precinct on the east side of High Street, south of Clarendon Street and immediately north of Clarendon Street, again open brackets numbers 630 to 656 and 658 to 668 High Street and 6 Clarendon Street, Thornbury, close brackets, new development is to be graduated in height from a maximum of 3 stories at the eastern boundary to a maximum height of 5 stories along High Street or 6 stories within 18 metres of the corner of High Street and Clarendon Street along both street frontages. So not only does the planning scheme encourage redevelopment of the site, it references a preferred height of 6 stories as proposed. Now, with regard to street wall heights and setbacks, whilst minor variations are proposed, we support the assessment of council officers. Now, that assessment recognises the expression of a street wall through the architecture of the building. It recognises the reference to an anchor attraction and therefore the ability for this corner to support a more robust response than might otherwise be the case. And we've heard from Mr. Rollis as well about the unique characteristics of the site in terms of its interfaces. Now, with regard to car parking, the supply of car parking is supported by not only the project traffic engineers but also council's traffic engineers, and I mentioned the council's transport unit. Now, the basis for that support distills to council's own transport strategy in clause 21, or the MSS provisions within the planning scheme, which encourage the use of more sustainable modes of transport, particularly in these sorts of locations. the existing car parking credits which apply, and we've heard from Mr. Rollis, I mentioned it again, about the reworking of the existing bank tenancy and historical credits which are relevant because of the lack of car parking currently provided on the site. Then there's the ability or the availability of on-street car parking, and there's also the council parking resource to the rear or to the east. More generally, the site's proximity to public transport, or we've got the tram which runs along High Street. And then we've also got data which has been put forward through the traffic engineering report, which deals with ABS census data and the likely car ownership characteristics. Lastly, in relation to the shared use of the laneway, well, the laneway is a logical place to take access from, and a number of strategies have been incorporated into the proposal to minimise any impacts.
Your time's almost up. Yep.
They include waiting or queuing areas and also traffic flow signals. So in summary, council should not be challenged by the decision which is before it. It's entirely consistent with the planning scheme, and given its context, we say there won't be any unreasonable local amenity consequences, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. You may take a seat back in the gallery. We also have an objector who's willing to speak here tonight. Could I please ask Vicky Zianas to come forward? Is Vicky here tonight? No. Is there anyone outside? No. Can we just check, please? I hope you could just be patient. Someone's just gone downstairs to see whether they're in the foyer downstairs. No? Okay. In that case, councillors, the objector's obviously not here. Are there any questions? Yeah, Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I'd just like to ask a question through you, Mr Chair, to the officers regarding the car parking solution proposed here and how that compares to current developments just south of here that are being constructed. The old BizBuzz site on the west side, and I think there's another one on the other, just in that this has no underground car parking.
Councillor, I'm not sure exactly what type of car parking provision those other sites have.
Yeah, I don't recall, that's what I'm asking.
No, I don't recall either, but they may be, I'm pretty sure BizBuzz has a basement type car parking arrangement. It may have some stackers. This is somewhat unique in that it has a car lift arrangement. But as the applicant indicated, or the consultant indicated, this has gone through our experts. And our experts, our traffic engineers, have indicated that it is a workable solution. VCAT also accept this arrangement as well, even though it isn't what we regularly see. It's normally basement car parking and individual spots. So our traffic engineers have indicated that this system works. The car parking spaces on the first floor have an access spot which allows the shuffling of vehicles. There's also the waiting bay at the ground level to avoid issue at the entry and exit to the system. So all we can say is that our traffic engineers have indicated that it is an acceptable form of car parking.
Any further questions, councillors?
Yes, if I
Councillor
could,
Rennie?
Mayor. Thank you. I'm interested in knowing more about the amenity of car parking that results from these arrangements. In particular, how long might one expect it would take to get a car out if it was in the stack and needed to come down the lift?
Councillor, that I don't know in terms of how long it will take. I'm assuming it would have to be a convenient arrangement for the occupants who have issue with it. But I don't know the exact timing in terms of once you call for your vehicle, how long it will take for it to arrive.
Okay.
Have a supplementary question?
Yes, look, I would like to foreshadow an alternative motion, but also ask a question about the light to the dwellings that are serviced by the light courts and what assessment had been undertaken of the amount of light that dwellings on the second floor of this building would get.
Councillor, Councillor, in terms of the light courts that have been provided, we've sought some additional advice from the applicant. They've actually undertaken a daylight assessment modelling for the apartments that have the bedroom windows to the light courts. That assessment has identified that adequate daylight reaches those bedrooms. It is also relevant to note that there are 2 light courts. There's a circulation space breaking the 2 light courts. There's a louvered opening at the uppermost level. So at this stage, the modelling that the applicants have undertaken have indicated that sufficient daylight will reach those spaces. I'd also like to add that the actual dimensions of those light courts are quite large. At least 3.5 by 3.5, they may even be larger than that. And in most instances where we have approved developments with light courts, and I'm referring to the development just north of Red Rooster, there are light courts to the boundary on the south side. Those light courts have a smaller dimension than what is proposed here, and they've been found to be satisfactory.
Thank you.
Councillor McCarthy.
Look, it's a supplementary to Councillor Rennie's question. It's just about whether, in relation to the light court as proposed, I would just ask whether officers consider, and I couldn't find the phrase used here, that we are dealing with the potential for borrowed amenity in this concept, particularly with comparison with the Australia Post site further down High Street, where a similar proposal that involved a light court and light access borrowed from an adjoining property has since resulted in lower level apartments being cast in darkness throughout the day. So I'm just wondering if the principle of borrowed amenity might actually be at play in relation to this application.
Can we get a comment?
Councillor, I'd be more concerned if that borrowed light was to the living spaces. So the borrowed light was to the bedrooms, the dwellings. So those dwellings also have access to daylight east and west of the site, so that would never be taken away. The officer had some input in designing or orienting some of those windows, as you can see on the floor plates, on an angle to allow more access to the daylight. There's also the view that, and this design does this, there's construction to the boundary on the north side, then we have the light court. What that arrangement allows is the neighbour to the north to realise development potential, so basically build up against those boundary walls. And then it's assumed that they will do the neighbourly thing and set components of their building away from those light courts. Having said that, this isn't reliant on that, but that's what normally happens. So there will be construction of wall, multi-level, alongside the sections of wall built to the northern boundary, and where there is the light court shown, you expect the neighbour to do the neighbourly thing that's set back from that component. As I said, it's not reliant on that. It would only assist in allowing more light penetration into that space.
Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? If there's not, I've got a question to ask, if I may, from the chair. I just in relation to parking, given that there's a high demand for parking in that particular precinct, I'm thinking of the market there and the parking lot that's associated with the market. What impact would that excess parking requirements have on the market and also the demand for parking and maintaining that shopping precinct, a vibrant shopping precinct?
Council, based on the applicant's expert traffic report, based on that assessment by our traffic engineers, the view is that it won't be an issue. The majority of the car parking is provided for the residential component. The office has, as we mentioned earlier, credits. It can exist without additional car parking legally, lawfully. And the shortfall of a few spaces for the shop, we believe can be absorbed without creating an impact. Having said all of that, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that bicycle parking, for example, is provided in excess of the standard. I think 9 bicycle spaces are required, and in the order of 20 odd, if not more, are proposed. So that plus the site proximity to excellent public transport all assists.
Are there any further questions? If there are no further questions, I understand, Councillor Rennie, you foreshadowed an alternate motion. Would you like to read that out?
Yes. That the planning permit
speak up, please.
The planning permit be denied on the grounds that the development is inconsistent with the policy objectives of clause 22.05, the High Street Corridor Land Use and Urban Design, precinct 5 of the Darren Planning Scheme. The development exceeds the street wall height of 8 to 10 metres to High Street and Clarendon Street. The height of the development at the eastern boundary laneway is not graduated from 3 storeys to a maximum of 6 storeys towards High Street. The location of car parking on the first floor results in a facade composition and urban design outcomes lacking in surveillance, activation and articulation. The proposal is not site responsive in terms of its height and placement of car parking at the first floor level. The proposal constitutes an overdevelopment of the site. The proposal fails to provide adequate internal amenity through a poorly designed light court that fails to allow sufficient natural light penetration to dwellings on the lower floors. And the proposal does not provide appropriately designed, located and sufficient car parking spaces to meet the parking demand generated by the development, and is not compliant with clause 5206 of the Darren Planning Scheme.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that alternate motion?
Happy to second it. I think it just needs to be clear in the opening statement, and maybe Councillor Rennie might be able to clarify this, that we're forming an opinion to not support rather than not granting a permit, because this matter is no longer in Council's jurisdiction, if I'm correct. So it would be the opening statement, if I'm correct, would be that Planning Committee or Council form the view to not support, and then as read. And very happy to second that.
Good point, Councillor McCarthy. Can we make that adjustment and then maybe read it out before?
Yep. So Council formed the view to not support the application on the grounds.
Okay.
If I can just clarify through our officers if that is the right words for us to go forward. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Rennie, would you like to speak to your alternate motion?
Yes, I think that whilst some development on this site is clearly appropriate and even desirable, this is not the type of development that is going to actually value add anything to the local community. I think the quality of the dwellings on offer is inadequate, particularly with respect to internal amenity and light. And I think that a failure to understand how this type of car parking might actually be received by residents is a significant failure that I cannot overlook.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy, as a seconder, anything to add?
Look, the alternative as put forward by Councillor Rennie is thorough and is based on very clear grounds that relates to Council's High Street Corridor Land Use Study, which councillors may be aware has had extensive work go into it, going back almost a decade now. So we need to be respectful of the strategic work that's taken place, and whilst I would echo the sentiments that there is potential on this site for redevelopment, It is an iconic corner. It is part of the Thornbury Village. It is the gateway to the Thornbury Village, and we need to deal with it very carefully. And the proposal that we have before us is insufficient on a number of technical grounds. And whilst you know, the retention of fine grain frontage and that sort of activity at the ground floor is welcome, that is the policy now. There are a whole lot of unintended consequences that flow from this proposal, not just the design outcomes, but also the parking issues as outlined.
Are there any speakers for or against? Councillor Lawrence?
I'll speak against the alternate motion. Fundamentally, with this application, I have some grave concerns about the car parking arrangements, and I am sort of aware we are forming a view here, but I am a little bit concerned that the grounds cited in the refusal speak to 3-storey setbacks to the east. And the reason I'm concerned about that is because that's actually a car park that's jointly owned by a private individual and council. And it's potentially a site for social housing, and it isn't a site of single-storey or double-storey terrace houses. So for that reason alone, I can't endorse the alternate motion, because I think it's fundamentally flawed going to VCAT to talk about 3-storey setbacks on a site that actually abuts another development site.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any further speakers for or against? If there's no further speakers, Councillor Rennie, you have the right of reply.
No, I'd suggest that we put the alternate motion. Thank you.
Okay, therefore we'll put the alternate motion as it was read previously. Those in favour of the alternate motion? Those against? Okay, the alternate motion is carried. That means, Council, that the alternate motion has been supported, which means that Council is not supporting the application before VCAT, and will be communicating that to VCAT via our representatives.
Okay, moving on to item 5.9, an application for a planning permit at 111 Royal Parade Reservoir. Over to the officers.
Thank you, Councillors. This is an application for a medium density development of a smaller scale than what we've just discussed. It is a proposal to retain an existing dwelling and construct alongside a 2-storey, 3-bedroom dwelling. The existing dwelling is 2-bedroom and proposes 3-bedroom. Open space is provided for each at ground level. Car parking provision is provided in accordance with the planning standard requirements. Should also note here that the site is not your regular rectangular site, it is a triangular site. And the new dwelling has street frontage to your greater as existing. This application was advertised to the community, and as a result 6 objections have been received. The grounds of objection are summarised at page 157 of the agenda. Our assessment of the proposal, councillors, is that the new dwelling is acceptable in the context. The new dwelling has street presence to Royal Parade. A compact front yard is provided to allow for planting. And at first floor, the development has been aligned in a staggered formation to prevent negative impact to the properties further east. very few windows have also been provided to that elevation. The only windows relate to the passage as you reach the level above the stairs on the first floor. The officer is recommending that those windows be treated to prevent any overbooking into neighbouring rear yards. Councillors, we propose that the application be supported with the conditions included in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no speakers registered for this application, so councillors, do you have any questions? No questions? So we have the officer recommendation in front of us. Do I have a mover and seconder? Or an alternative motion?
I'll move that we support the officer recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Rennie. And Councillor Amir. Councillor Rennie, would you like to speak to the motion?
Only to say I think this is a fairly modest proposal for development on a site that's not easy to use because of the unusual shape, and I think that it's proposed at quite a reasonable solution given the size of the land and the size of the dwelling units.
Thank you. Councillor Amir?
No, nothing further to add.
Would any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Greco?
Yeah, look, I'll just add to that comment that I'll be supporting this application. It is an unusual site. There's a lot of vacant land, and I think that having one extra dwelling on that land, it actually comes to me as a surprise. Usually, sometimes in cases like this, developers try to put 3 or even up to 4 developments. So if we could secure one extra development on this site, I think it's a good compromise.
Thank you. Any other speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. So the Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors had 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Moving on to item 5.10, 24 Claude Street, Northcote. Over to the officers.
Thank you, councillors. Once again, is an application for a medium density development on the site known as Claude Street, Northcote. The proposal includes partial demolition of the existing dwelling. However, the front facade and chimney of the existing dwelling is proposed to be retained. The construction of 2 double-storey dwellings. Each of the proposed dwellings comprises 2 bedrooms. Each dwelling is provided with an area of at least 37 square metres of secluded private open space located at the ground level. In this instance, no on-site car parking provision is proposed. Councillors, this application was advertised and attracted 9 objections from the community, and the objections are summarised at page 171 and 172 of the agenda. A few of the main concerns that we have with the project, councillors, is that there's no on-site car parking provision, firstly. 2, that the development presents with large 2-storey walls to boundaries, which we believe will impact on the immediate neighbours. Further to that, the construction of the development will cast what we consider to be an unreasonable shadow onto modest-sized neighbouring secluded open space. Councillors, we recommend this application not be supported with the grounds noted in the agenda.
Thank you. I invite the applicant's representative, Mr. Daniel Zureb, to speak. Thank you. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and councillors. So I'm Daniel Zureb from DX Architects, the applicant for the application. Throughout the town planning process for 24 Claude Street, Northcote, we've attempted to work with council to resolve any identified issues and liaise with council's expert heritage, traffic consultants, and address planning policy to achieve a good urban design outcome. Our clients identified this as a suitable development property for a small-scale infill development to alter an existing dwelling and add a second dwelling on the lot. They approached us as experienced local architects to achieve a good high quality design outcome. Our practice works primarily on residential dwellings in inner city, and over the past 8 years we've completed many successful high quality projects that have developed good experience in creating good urban design outcomes. Our clients are seeking to alter the existing dwelling and add a second dwelling on the lot to provide for two bedroom dwellings. The proposed dwellings are well located within Northcote and within easy access to transport, shopping and recreation facilities. The dwelling is part of a row of 7 terrace dwellings on narrow inner city lots with boundary to boundary construction and high site coverage. 24 Claus Street Northcote has a gap on the side street interface which interrupts the terrace streetscape and therefore provides an opportunity for a small infill development. Upon our initial inquiries with Council, we were advised to discuss the proposal with the Council's Heritage Advisor to confirm the suitability of the site for development and resolve the appropriate exterior details and form for development. We subsequently developed a proposal to include appropriate facade detail and finishes and have developed a proposal which was our understanding was an appropriate solution within the heritage context. Throughout the town planning process we attempted to address Council concerns regarding traffic and planning Clause 55 requirements, but because we were not provided with specific correspondence and documents, it was somewhat difficult to determine if alterations to the proposal were required. In relation to car parking, which was probably the main concern, we provided Council with an expert traffic engineering assessment prepared by Ratio Consultants, which concluded that a reduction to zero car parking was acceptable on the basis that the site was well located to alternative transport means. Many other dwellings on Claus Street don't have access to car parking, and also that Claus Street had parking on both sides of the road to accommodate parking. Further to this, the removal of the existing crossover to the existing site allowed for an additional car parking space to be accommodated on Claus Street. I wanted to point out that our initial application to Council did accommodate off-street parking in the shared arrangement within the backyard, accessed via a rear laneway. However, upon discussions with Council, it was determined that private open space, separate from parking facilities, was probably more important, and therefore the proposal was altered to remove the car parking to achieve a better urban design outcome for the dwellings. In relation to the Clause 55 assessment in the planning report, there are a few areas which we felt maybe don't adequately consider the context of the site when assessing the proposal. In relation to the siting, it referred to, I guess it doesn't really indicate that the boundary development is very typical within that streetscape, and obviously it's within a row of 7 similar terrace houses with boundary form. In relation to the materials, it referred to the fact that felt the proposed materials for development weren't acceptable. However, our correspondence with the Heritage Advisor indicated that it was an acceptable proposal with the first floor rear addition due to the setback from the street and limited visibility within the heritage context. In relation to the street setback at the front, it indicated that that wasn't acceptable. However, it just simply continued the existing street setback of the adjoining sort of properties, and I think indicated that the 2.2 metre setback wasn't appropriate, but the 2.25 metres, an extra 50 mil, was required. So there are a few areas there, I guess, that we felt within the sort of Clause 55 assessment didn't really typically assess the context in relation to the decision. So in conclusion, I guess we feel that we should strongly consider this to be a suitable development property for a small-scale infill development, and hope you can support it.
Thank you. You can resume your seat. So I invite the objector, David Francis, to speak. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Firstly, I agree with the planner's report. I sort of represent, well, I'm an architect, I've lived in the area for 35 years, and I've been doing this sort of work for 45 or 50 years, so I've got a fair idea what I'm talking about. Firstly, when I spoke to the officer in response to the application, I was actually told that there was no pre-act meeting and that it had been avoided. I'll just leave that one alone. Look, I think it's a pretty poor design. It ignores solar access, it's too bulky. I mean, if you go through the planner's report, there's a whole list of all the areas where it fails to comply. I would like to take some issue with the planners themselves on the parking provisions. The design of these units is actually 3-bedroom. It's blatantly 3-bedroom. There's a downstairs living room, which is a separate room. And I've had planning advice to, experienced planning advice to say that if that were to be canon, it would be considered as a 3-bedroom. Therefore, we're 4 cars short. Secondly, the whole parking situation in Flora Street and adjacent streets is pretty desperate. We have a terrible parking permit system whereby we're protected during the week when no one's home, and we're totally unprotected at night and all weekend. There's a gig on at the Northcote Town Social Club or anywhere in High Street. We can't park in the interior of our own houses. So that's another thing that I'm going to address anyway with the council, is the permit system. I've also done measurements of the street, and the removal of the crossover does not, in fact, increase the parking on the curb because of the configuration of the neighbouring driveway crossover and the existing street trees and the bollards separating car spaces. I think the space that is left over is only about 4 metres, and that's not a legal car space. You can't get into it. And yeah, I agree also that it does not comply with neighbourhood character. I think it's a lazy design. It offers nothing to the street. Yes, there's room to put an infill in, but we shouldn't copy something that was built 2 centuries ago. There's room here for some intelligent contemporary design to fit in with the street, because streetscapes represent history. They don't just represent the current fashion. And, you know, I'm not against the development, but it's an overdevelopment by a long way. And it fails to comply with almost everything. I think that's about it.
Thank you, Mr Francis. You can resume your seat. Councillors, questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Oh, look, I don't have a question. I'm happy to move the recommendation to refuse the application.
Does anyone else have a question?
I have a question.
Councillor Lawrence.
Just if we, through you, Madam Chair, if we could get a response from the officers in regard to the assertion that the front living/study is or isn't a 3rd bedroom. How's that ascertained?
Officers.
Mr Francis is correct in that it could be converted to an additional bedroom. We need to assess the application as we see it before us. It is identified as a living space/study with an opening alongside. So you walk alongside it to get to your living space. If Council were to approve this development and shown as a living space, and those plans are endorsed that way, it has to be used that way. Having said that, could a future occupant change it without us knowing? They potentially could, because we wouldn't know about it. But what we have before us is 2 2-bedroom dwellings. Living spaces is how we are assessing the application.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
No, Madam Chair.
So, Councillor McCarthy, mover. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Williams. Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to speak?
I'll keep my comments very brief. Firstly, just to mention that I believe in the history of Darebin Council planning decisions that have been at the Planning Committee, we've never opposed an officer recommended refusal. I don't see any reason to depart from that tradition. There are very clear grounds for refusing this application, as the officers have identified in the recommendation and in the report, and I think also as raised by the objector. I'm a little bit surprised that this actually got to advertising with the inadequacies that have been identified, but I would just draw, and particularly for new councillors, to the attention of everyone, that this is actually one of the rare instances where neighbourhood character has been referenced as a ground of refusal, and is quite well substantiated, and it's welcoming to see neighbourhood character play a role in this particular refusal recommendation. So on that basis, I'm happy to move it as it is.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Nothing further to add, Madam Chair.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. The Planning Committee has decided to refuse the planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAP. Notices detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. Okay, item 5.11, application for planning permit at 2 Margaret Grove, Preston. Officers.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. This application seeks approval to construct 3 9-storey dwellings. 2 of the 3 dwellings are 3 bedrooms. The remaining dwelling is a 2-bedroom dwelling. Each of the dwellings has the required amount of parking under the planning scheme. That's 2 each for the 3-bedroom dwellings and a single garage for the 2-bedroom dwelling. The application has been advertised. In response, there's been 17 objections received. These are detailed and responded to on pages 190 to 193 of the officer's report. Majority of the concerns relate to neighbourhood character and a number of general provisions. There's also some concern raised regarding overlooking impacts, and I draw the committee's attention to several conditions which seek to address those, which is specifically referenced in the report. There's also, in terms of neighbourhood character, there's some commentary in the report about how the matter complies with standards in the planning scheme, and in particular the neighbourhood character study. There's concerns raised about the 2-storey form through the building. The officer's assessment is that that's not inconsistent with the immediate and surrounding area. The application is therefore recommended for support in accordance with the conditions set out in the report.
Thank you. I have an objector registered to speak. Right. So we have no speakers for this application, so we'll move to the councillor's questions. Councillor Lawrence.
Through you, Madam Chair. Again, I raised this question through you to the officers regarding the uniform 2-storey form and how a 100% 2-storey form in a development can address the housing policies of the City of Darebin.
Officers?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's about the enforceability of that particular policy, and if you go to the fine detail of the policy, it does support a variety of housing types. Obviously, there's encouragement for dwellings that provide access for all, or that can be adjusted as people age. It's not a mandatory requirement of the planning scheme. It's something that's encouraged, and overall, from a broad decision-making context, there will be 2-storey forms, but there will also be a number of forms that come before the committee to provide an access for all outcome. But it's not something that council can impose or decide decision by decision.
Thank you. Any further questions? There's the officer recommendation in front of us. Do I have a mover and seconder? Or an alternative?
Just note, Chair, that the silence is deafening. Can I ask where we are, through you, Chair, where we are in relation to the 60 days, should councillors wish to give this further consideration?
Officers?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're in excess of the 60 days.
Thank you.
In that case, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Amir, do I have a seconder? Do I? No, is there no seconder?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Amir, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I visited this site this afternoon, and I note that while this is, indeed 3 double-storey townhouses, which is inconsistent to surrounding blocks in regards to having 3 on one site, it is actually similar in size to some of the, the 2-storey limit is consistent with the surrounding houses, including the one directly next to the site. And 2 houses down there are 3 units on the same block. So this model is not inconsistent with what's on the street.
Thank you. Councillor Newton, would you wish to add anything?
No further comment.
Does any other councillor wish to speak?
I'll just speak against the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence.
I still, obviously it's a 3-unit site in terms of site coverage that can be expected on blocks in Preston that are roughly 600 to 670 square metres. But I note there is 2-storey form, but I would note that we have 3 existing yards surrounding it, and that this application, by applying 2 storeys to the rear of the site, is imposing unacceptable visual bulk on those and is inconsistent with the garden character to the north and the east.
Thank you. Any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? The motion is lost.
Can I call for a division, Madam Chair?
All those in favour stand. I name Councillor Newton, Councillor Surf and Councillor Rennie. All those against, please stand. I name Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco, Councillor Williams, Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Rennie.
I'd like to move an alternative motion, given that we need to make a decision in relation to this, that the item be deferred, the item come back to the Planning Committee at its next meeting to be reconsidered by the Planning Committee.
Do I have a second?
If I'm correct in the wording of that, I believe we need a procedural motion for it to come back to us to make a decision. Unless there is a refusal that a councillor has worded.
Happy to second that.
I'm not sure what the procedure is here, but perhaps I should have spoken to the motion. I think it would be good if a recommendation could go back at some point, that if the 3rd dwelling was single-storey, that would make this development more appropriate to the site.
So we have an alternative motion already before us. Would you like to speak to... Do you want to write down the motion?
Or the motion is simply that it come back to the Planning Committee at the next meeting. I believe, if I'm correct, we need a procedural motion unless there's a refusal or an amendment as foreshadowed by Councillor Rennie.
What would be the purpose of deferring it?
Well, just because we've got to keep moving.
Could I put an alternative motion perhaps then?
We have to move through this.
I'll withdraw. If there's an alternative motion that can deal with the business, I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay.
On the second, I'm happy to withdraw if it addresses garden character and visual bulk.
Yep.
Councillor Rennie?
Okay, so my alternative motion is that the development is inconsistent with the policy objectives of the development planning scheme. In particular, the 3 times 2-storey is an overdevelopment of the site and creates excessive visual bulk and is inconsistent with neighbourhood character.
Do I have a seconder for that motion?
Happy to second that.
Before the motion's spoken to, can I just seek clarification through you to our officers in relation to the grounds of objection from an officer's point of view? Because should this be appealed at BCAT, then the grounds, and this is successful, the grounds would need to be quite strong.
Officers?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The key concerns that were raised by objectors concerned overlooking. There are conditions relating to that specifically in the officer's report. There are also, one of the difficulties with neighbourhood character is that the neighbourhood character policy requires very considerable setback to the upper floor. It is 2nd storey. It doesn't preclude 2nd storey. And the development before you actually provides exactly that arrangement. That was a key concern also and I think that the concerns support what Councillor Lawrence was saying about the two-storey form being right through the entire site. So my suggestion, if that's the way you want to go, that you word that you relate it specifically to the two-storey form through the entire site.
Are we happy with the wording of the motion?
Point, but I would say I've seconded the motion on the basis of neighbourhood character. Specifically, I have addressed it as garden character. It is an issue that there is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 backyards intact, and that has been upheld at VCAT through Banff Street. So those sort of conditions address neighbourhood character isn't just frontage. It's the rear, the density in the rear yards and the current use of private open space there. I believe there is a case for arguing less bulk.
Point of order, Chair. We are in the middle of a motion that has some clauses. If councillors wish to add to the clauses of the motion, that needs to occur rather than the negotiation on the floor. So
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Just conscious of where we're...
If the mover, I don't know if I can move this, could have neighbourhood character and site both surrounding private open space and garden character.
I'd be very happy
with that. Is the mover happy with that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's accepted. So, Councillor Greco?
Yeah, just in terms of...
Are you speaking to the motion? Or?
No, I have a question.
Okay.
Clarification. I've noted here in the report there's the issue of street setback, that it doesn't meet the standard. I just want to get some clarification through you, the Chair, whether that's been adequately addressed in the conditions, because if it has not been adequately addressed in the conditions, it then could be another point that could be included as part of the alternate motion.
Officers?
As set out in the report, Madam Mayor, that it is not addressed through conditions. The officer's report just says that there's a variation of setback through the street and what's proposed is unreasonable. So technically there's not compliance.
So given that
we will add that to the reasons for refusal, that there's inadequate setbacks.
Is the mover and seconder?
Yep, happy with
yes. That. Now, can you write those points down, please?
Do you want me to have a go?
From the top, yeah. Yep.
Okay. The alternate motion is that council, and I think it's already past the date, is it? Or are we refusing the permit on the grounds that, or council forms the view not to support the application because it's inconsistent with the policy objectives of the Darebin planning scheme, with particular regard to inadequate setbacks. It's inconsistent with neighbourhood character, especially garden character in the area. There's an over-reliance on the two-storey built form, and it's an overdevelopment of the site. Have I captured? Okay.
It's not been submitted to the VCAT yet, so it's not performing a view.
No, so it is a refusal. Okay, so we'll refuse the permit on those grounds.
Yes. Thank you. Would you like to speak to that motion now?
Look, I think that it wouldn't take a lot for this application to come up to scratch, and in particular I'm concerned about universal access to dwellings, and there's not one of these dwellings that was appropriate throughout the life course for people at whatever stage of mobility. I think that if the third dwelling were to be single storey, that would actually mean that one of these dwellings could be made appropriate for people at every stage of their life. It would also significantly reduce the visual bulk at the rear of the property and any overshadowing that comes from that.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you for inviting me to speak. Look, I think this is important. This has come up in Reservoir quite a bit, this type of development in the east part of Reservoir. And there is a time when streets reach a point of no return, where there's so many examples of overdevelopment that you cannot stop it. But here we actually have only really two 3-unit developments adjoining it, and we have dozens of backyards still. Now, the point about neighbourhood character, which I'd cite Banff Street where we did win, is the issue of neighbourhood character and garden character is that what is the pattern and use of density in the neighbourhood? And in that regard in Banff Street, VCAT said that the 40 square metres of private open space was not adequate in that area because the area was predominantly had intact backyards and had large open space, private open space. And the point here about a neighbourhood character fit, it includes the use of the backyards. And good neighbourhood fit, of course, increases density but addresses that. And also, obviously, the issue of universal access, we do not have a trigger to impose that. I wish we did. We're not providing housing for elderly. We're not providing housing for the disabled, who this policy of densification is meant to help downsizing of older people. But we can lessen the impact of this development. It can lessen the impact on those backyards by going to a single storey on the 3rd unit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do I have any further speakers? I will put that to the vote. All those in favour?
In favour of the
refusal? Yep. All those against? That's carried. So the Planning Committee has decided to refuse the planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. Notices detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week.
Can I please?
Yes. So all those in favour, can you please stand of refusing the application? So I name Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco, Councillor Newton, Councillor Williams, Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Rennie. All those against, please stand. I name Councillor Sir and Councillor Rennie. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 5.12, application for planning permit at 445 to 453 High Street and 1 to 13 Beavers Road, Northcote. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is an application that is already the subject of an appeal against the failure to grant permit in time. So the application before you is asking Council to form a view. The application seeks approval to amend an existing permit. The permit already granted is for 6 storeys on this site on the corner of High Street and Beavers Road, Northcote. The proposal is to increase the height of the development from 6 to 8 storeys, so from 92 apartments to 114, including 5 ground level apartments. What it constitutes now is 38 one-bedroom apartments and 76 two-bedroom. Car parking is to be increased from 108 to 140 spaces. There is a reduction in the number of shops or commercial premises proposed, which has increased those ground floor residential units. So they reduced from 5 to 3. There's also extensive modifications proposed in the revised palette of materials to the external finishes. Notice the application has been undertaken was also referred to Melbourne Water being subject to low level flooding. The key issues regarding this application concern the conversion of the ground floor shops, the increase in height, which in the officer's assessment and report is considered excessive above the preferred maximum height. There are also concerns expressed regarding the car parking and the change to the commercial premises. The recommendation before you is that Council forms a view to oppose the grant for the permit for the additional floor height from 6 to 8 storeys. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. There are no speakers registered for this application, so councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor McCarthy.
No questions. Happy to move the recommendation of refusal.
Any questions before we move? No? Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to speak?
Just briefly, and I recall the original application coming to the Chamber and Council, I believe, refusing that at the time, which triggered the first VCAT consideration. Here we are being asked to put forward our view, and of course the officer recommendation is very clear. There are strong grounds to not support this application in its current form. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
Nothing further to add.
Any other councillor wish to speak? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. So the Planning Committee has formed a view not to support the amendment to the planning permit. And that's going to VCAT. Okay. Item 6, other business.
I'd move that item 6.1.
Happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Williams. Do you wish to speak?
No.
No, we don't.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? I think that's carried. Item 7, urgent business.
None tonight.
No urgent business. And item 8, close of the meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
And councillors, just a reminder that we're now having a briefing with David after completion.
Debriefing, yes.